Um, when I came out of Scientology, my head was, I've said that my head was very spinny. I was kind of all over the place, as you can imagine, being involved in a destructive cult for a couple decades, and then coming out of it and realizing within a few months that it was all nonsense and bullshit. That can really leave you wondering which way is up. And so I had, took quite some time to get my head on straight and start figuring out what to do and what to think and how to think. And that's where I hit on critical thinking. Now, I've told that story before, but I find myself in that position again now. Now, not in the same degree, but in a similar situation of this election has forced me to reevaluate my biases. And really, that's what I was doing when I came out of Scientology too. We all have cognitive biases. We have prejudices. We have filters. We have things that we think or feel or have opinions about, and those shape the way we see the world. That's how we perceive things. And these filters can act like barriers to receiving information, or even looking for or challenging ourselves about the information that we have. We're so sure that we're right. We're so sure that we've nailed, how the world really works, and this must be it, and this is the viewpoint that I have, and there cannot be any other. Well, that's frankly just nonsense. There are lots of viewpoints out there. There are lots of ideas out there, and some of them have a whole lot of validity and they're very fact-based. In other words, they're provable, they're evidence-based. You can look at things that support those ideas and see that they have some truth to them. Then there are a lot of ideas that we cling to that have no validity, but we cling to them anyway because for whatever reason, it makes us feel good. Now, I'm talking about on politically, culturally, religiously, whatever, any area of life. We're just talking about how we think. So these biases can really, color our view of things. And when I was in Scientology, I had all kinds of cognitive biases about, how homosexuality is automatically a mental illness every single time. There are no exceptions. Anybody in the LGBT world is just pretty much is suffering from a form of insanity, and that can only be resolved with Scientology. This was a bias that I had against the LGBT community, or even more prominently known when it comes to Scientology is their view on psychiatry and how evil psychiatry is. Very black and white thinking in Scientology about psychiatry. It's just wrong. Everything about it is wrong. It should not exist. And they brag amongst themselves within the world of Scientology how they are literally eradicating, destroying, and bringing about the end of psychiatry and psychology. They feel that strongly about it. So you can imagine with a bias like that you're not going to be receptive to receiving positive information about psychotropic medications that might actually be helping people. And you're not going to be receptive to the idea that maybe somebody could use some mental health counseling after a tragedy or a loss or some devastating event that happens to them in their life. As a Scientologist, they don't want to hear it. They just think all of it is complete crap, right? But it's not all crap. There's a lot of good that's done by psychiatry and psychology. They're not all good either. It's not like we have to go from one end of the pendulum to the other. Right? It's not all bad. It's not all good. Well, I had to realize this for myself. I had to re-educate myself and strip away some of those biases that I had when I came out of Scientology. So now I find myself in that exact same position in evaluating and re-evaluating some of the liberal and left-wing views that I've had, and also some of the biases that I've had against conservatives or the right wing, right? In other words, looking at these things sort of with trying to be more objective, trying to take some of the blinders off or some of the filters off might be a better way of putting it. They're not blinders, so much as just, filters. So in doing that, I've found that I've been going through this sort of, cognitive bias stripping process. And it's been quite interesting the last few days. And I'm sure that this is going to, this kind of process is an ongoing thing. But I wanted to share it with you guys because I have seen in the last couple days since the election a great degree of what I believe to be exaggerated concern and worries over some things. And I've also seen very valid concerns and worries about some things. And I'm not going to make a list and tell you guys what to think about it. I'm merely going to caution you to, now more than ever, evaluate the facts behind stories that you're seeing. Look at sources, fact check them, because there's a lot of bluster flying around right now on both sides of the political fence, all sides of the political fence. And there's a lot of very extreme actions being taken in some places with these riots and whatnot going on in the streets in some cities. There's certainly nothing wrong whatsoever with going out and making your voice be heard and protesting in a civil manner. That is a right that we have. But it seems rather counterproductive and feeding into a narrative against oneself to go out and riot in protest of a duly held election. Like what do you think that's going to do? Do you really think Trump's going to step down? Do you really think you're going to change the results of the election by going out and burning some buildings or beating some people up? It's not very constructive at all, right? There are very, very important things and very, very important issues that should be tackled, that should be addressed. I've talked about some of them on this show, and I really would like your help with my viewers here to spread some of what I've been talking about. I did a show about voting rights and voter ID laws and this sort of thing weeks ago. I thought that was a very important episode. Frankly, not that many people watched it. And yet, those voter ID laws have everything to do with keeping certain groups of people from voting. And had those voter ID laws, and of course, within the last few weeks, we couldn't have changed those laws, but just raising awareness on that and getting some of those laws changed for the next election and the next one could result in positive gain because we will have more people voting, more people more easily voting and making their voice be heard. And if you're on the left right now, that was a factor. Voter turnout was a factor in the Trump-Clinton election. Now, I'm not sitting here at this point favoring Clinton or favoring Trump or anything like that because I'm sort of stepping back from this thing. And I intend on talking about political matters in the future, but I intend on talking about them from a nonpartisan point of view. I'm not going to push liberalism or left-wing politics on anybody because I myself am feeling less and less in that direction right now. And I think that that's going to continue as I continue to learn more about the issues and the things that are really plaguing America and creating a lot of division out there. I want to really try to understand what's happening so that I don't have a filtered view of my country or my state or what's going on in the world. And I think critical thinking is imperative to that we apply that to the things that we hear, the things that we read, and the things that we see. The last thing I want to say before we get into our interview for this week is you're going to hear a lot more from me now and into the future about what I'm going to start calling anti-social media, because I believe that we have, through Facebook and Twitter and various things, we've constructed a mechanism that has been the single largest machine in the world for propagating misinformation. And we didn't do it on purpose. It was an unintended consequence of the internet and the freedom of information that we now have available to us. There's in the old days, there were rumor mongers, and then when the printing press was invented, there were pamphlets. And people could, as literacy levels rose and as more and more people could read, pamphleteers would create these little booklets and distribute them around to spread their ideas. And that, of course, was generally speaking fairly small groups of people, right? A town, a city, something like that, right? Perhaps a state. Very rarely would it go beyond that, perhaps to a nation. Now, anyone with a couple, clicks of a button can propagate a false narrative or a false story, and it can reach millions very, very rapidly. And that is changing hearts and minds. That is changing thought. And when you use misinformation to change minds, whether you know it or not, and I suspect that there are people who do know that they are using misinformation, they are misinforming people on purpose in order to get them swayed in a certain direction. That is called undue influence, because the person receiving that information is not aware that they are being lied to. Now, it's not all on the person who's propagating the information, and what I'm saying is that we who are receiving this information, before we spread it on, we must be sure that we are fact-checking our information, because I'll tell you, Facebook sure isn't. Twitter sure isn't. Mark Zuckerberg doesn't really particularly care whether the information is true or false. He just wants that information spread around because it's all about advertising for them. And the media, unfortunately, at this point, both left-wing and right-wing, and it cannot be relied on for 100% accurate, in-depth analysis and reporting either. What more proof do you need than the fact that the media was clueless, just as shocked as we were, about the results of the election? The media are the people who are supposed to be boots on the ground all over the United States, talking to people, finding out where their hearts and their minds are at, and reporting on that information. That's what political reporting should be all about, but it's not what political reporting is all about. Depending on which news media station you're listening to biased news reporting. That's not journalism. That's something else. That's called propaganda.